When it comes to the horse industry, tax laws are complicated and unique. That's why most people in the horse industry overpay on their taxes. We have the expertise to save you taxes. Why not get a second opinion from the top-rated accounting and tax firm in the thoroughbred industry, the Green Group? There's a reason the most successful owners, breeders, trainers, vets, and horsemen use the Green Group as their tax advisors. We save you taxes. Over the past 40 years, the Green Group founder, Len Green, has owned and bred some of the best racehorses in the history of the sport. His DJ stable competes at the highest level and has received the game's most prestigious honors. Len Green's in-depth, hands-on industry knowledge, combined with current-edge tax-saving strategies, produces positive tax savings results for clients. Take advantage of this special offer. The Green Group will give you a complimentary and confidential review of your tax return. Contact us at 732-634-5100 or visit our website at www.greenco.com.
I have 52,000 starts in my life. I've never seen one that could take as much as he did early and continue to improve.
And it is Godite.
He's strong, he's attractive.
And he's gonna win the hopeful.
He's extremely smooth and fluid.
Gunite is a tough customer here as they come on for the finish.
How sound he is.
Gunite got the jump.
Consistent mentally, physically.
He will defeat Elite Power in the forego.
Complete package.
The main philosophy of Centennial Partnerships is to mitigate risk through diversification, and that includes a group of horses and a group of people. But we don't want to take away the experience and the fun of the sport, so we limit the number of people in each partnership. We try to make the experience for people as exciting and as memorable as possible.
Hi, my name is Gary Falter with the Jockey Club. Just like to welcome everyone to today's online panel. Now, this is the 7th panel in our series of 10 online Zoom panels for this year. And today's panel, we're going to talk about buying and racing on an international stage. So before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors, starting with the presenting sponsors, which are the Green Group, Bessemer Trust, and Stoll Keen and Ogden. And today's panel sponsors are Coolmore America and Centennial Farm. And our Q&A sponsor today is West Point Thoroughbreds. I believe we just saw their ad. Our thanks to all the sponsors for their continued support of thoroughbred ownership and helping us offer these webinars at no charge to you. So you can see all the logos of the sponsors on your screen. And just a wonderful list, and we appreciate that. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our speakers today. I'm going to start off with Garrett O'Rourke. Hello, Garrett. Welcome.
Thank you.
So Garrett's the general manager of Juddmonte Farm here in the U.S., and Garrett's been with Juddmonte since 1992. He's a native of Limerick, Ireland, and grew up with horses. And some of the horses campaigned by Juddmonte with Garrett in charge are Idiomatic, we all know her, the Great Arrowgate, Elite Power, Champion Sprinter, Mandaloon, the Great Empire Maker, and Toussaint, probably, arguably, one of the greatest brood mares of all time. So in 2001, Garrett was named Farm Manager of the Year by the Kentucky Thoroughbred Farm Manager Club. And recently, Garrett was named a member of the Jockey Club. Congratulations, Garrett. Next, I'd like to introduce Pete Bradley. Hello, Pete.
Hello, how are you doing?
Pete's been involved in the purchase and the sale of some of the world's best thoroughbreds year after year. In 2014, he was involved with 2 Breeders' Cup winners in Day at the Spa and Lady Eli. And Pete is known for being a rare combination of an outstanding horseman and an astute businessman. Bradley Thoroughbreds LLC continues as a top performer in the industry and races here in the U.S. and overseas. Next, I'd like to welcome Philip Shelton. Philip, you're muted right now. There you are. Welcome.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me.
So Philip is the racing manager since its inception of the Medallion Racing. And Philip began kind of at the bottom, working his way as a groom to prep sale horses for all the different thoroughbred auctions throughout the year. He moved into the office there at TaylorMade in the spring of 2016 and began working on the plans for Medallion Racing. And Medallion Racing has had some great success racing in the U.S. and overseas. And Philip lives in Lexington with his wife Taylor and son Keen and daughter Marin. And we were planning to have Rick Gold on the call today, but sadly he had a medical family emergency and can't be with us today. So we wish Rick well. Okay, so racing has become, I think we all know this, an international sport. Many owners are taking advantage of acquiring horses from international sources, and some are actually shipping their horses from the U.S. to compete in other countries. This panel includes speakers that will talk about the pros and cons of buying and racing overseas and buying foreign horses to come to the U.S. to race. So let's get started with a couple of questions for Garrett. So Garrett, Juddmonte, you guys race all over the world. You win races from places such as Royal Ascot, Saratoga, Chantilly in France, Keeneland. You just won a nice stakes race at Del Mar. Give the audience an idea of that ownership experience in Europe and how that compares to here in the U.S., because you've won races all over the world.
Yeah, I suppose there are a lot of differences and a lot of similarities, really, from the racing at the top end, which is obviously the end that we would be racing at in Europe. The prestige probably in Europe is something in the history and the tradition that is associated with racing that outdates what there is over here. Obviously, you know, Royal Ascot is something very special. Newmarket is the home of racing over there, where a lot of the stud farms and top races sales are all over there. Longchamp in Chantilly in France, magnificent experience of the racetrack there has changed quite a bit, as it has done in Royal Ascot in recent years with new facilities. The irony probably is that in my early days of going to the races over there, they were older racetracks with a lot of what we would have expected maybe from the older tradition in Europe. But the Royal Ascots and Longchamps and the Curragh, they're all brand spanking new facilities now, catering to a different clientele. You know, people want to go on the big days. They will spend the top end tickets price range wise, and they expect the comfortable facilities. And obviously Churchill Downs probably is the standard bearer over here, but being closely followed now by new renovations in Belmont and soon to be Pimlico as well. And Keeneland has a whole new renovation taking place at the moment. And I think the racing experience now worldwide is somewhat similar. I've not been to Australia, but they tell me that it's quite spectacular over there as well. I credit an awful lot of that, to be honest with you, to Dick Duchessois at Arlington. And I can remember going to Arlington for the first time with a lot of Europeans. I was working actually, Robert Sangster had runners there that day, and I was floored by the hospitality given to everybody. And then a lot of people started to come to Arlington and from all around the world and figure, look, this is what people want if they're going to spend money in the game. We're spending huge amounts on race horses, and you want a comfortable top end day at the races. And I think that started what is now standard at places like Royal Ascot and Longchamp and Australia and over here now as well. People will pay the ticket prices. As far as racing is concerned, obviously, very, very different racing. One of the other things we can have over here that's tougher probably over there is good weather. Saratoga is a great place to go in the summer. Del Mar is a great place to go in the summer, and the racing moves with the weather over here. Over there, yeah, you oftentimes go with your raincoat on and your hat, and but again, with comfortable facilities, the racing experience, I think, no matter where you are in the world, is a much more pleasant day than it used to be, from my memory, going to Ireland on a Saturday with the wind howling. And but the horses, obviously, standard of racing is a little bit, the standard is the same, the style of racing is a little bit different, all turf racing over there and dirt and turf racing over here. But again, the world is getting an awful lot smaller, and there's an awful lot more interaction with the foreign players today than there was when I came over here in 1986.
Sure. Okay. So, you race a lot of your homebreds. How do you decide which horses target the U.S. racetracks and which ones would go overseas? Is it pretty much where they're born, or do you have horses that are born here that are more suited for racing overseas and vice versa?
It's very much horses for courses, wherever they fit best and can win best. When, being the most productive is where they'll end up. Now, when I was at Juddmonte at first, all of the best stallions in the world were in Kentucky. So our best broodmares were in Kentucky. And even though at the time an awful lot of the offspring that were being produced by those mares were going to be turf horses, so back then we'd produce 100 head of foals every year as yearlings. They'd be broken, and probably 70 to 80 of them would be put on planes and sent to Ireland, England, and France to race over there. And then the ones that we felt that were identified as horses that might need firm ground and suited American tight racetracks then would come back to race as older horses, some of them very productively, and even some of them with the pedigrees to suggest that maybe they could run on dirt over here. And, we had even some that weren't necessarily bred to run on dirt that did come back over here. We won, I think, 4 Pacific Classics in about 6 years, 2 with Skimming, 2 with Tinner's Way. Tinner's Way was obviously by Secretariat and bred to run on dirt, but Skimming was a Nureyev, and he came back over here and won 2 Pacific Classics. So I think trainers point to you take your best guess when you're dealing with yearlings as to where they best suit, and then when they're racing in certain jurisdictions, trainers will point you towards the right decision to, maybe you try this one in the States. And we've got trainers that have been with us long enough that we're able to follow their direction pretty well.
Well, I think that answered my next question. Maybe once a horse starts racing, will Juddmonte keep that horse in place, or will you ship them between Europe and the U.S. and vice versa based on what the trainers are seeing?
Yeah, definitely. And it's obviously going to be less of an issue if you have a horse over in America that runs on dirt and there isn't opportunity to run over there. But it is the case very much so with horses that are running over there. And oftentimes, it used to be years ago, sometimes when Lasix was allowed over here, we would bring a horse that maybe needed Lasix, but that's not an issue anymore, which is good. And I think now the level playing fields across the world make it easier to not to have to try and figure that out as well, and add another chink to the what is already a tough, complex decision.
Okay. So thanks, Garrett. Let's jump over to Pete right now, and I had a couple questions for you, Pete. So recently you were in France where your horse Metropolitan has been quite successful. So in his last 3 starts, what I looked up on Metropolitan, he finished 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in Group 1 races. So talk about that experience as an owner from the U.S. What was that like, having ownership in a horse that ran so well in those top races?
Nothing short of phenomenal. For a kid from California, from a little town called Elk Grove, to say that winning a French Classic was on my bucket list, nowhere near what I thought I'd be doing when I got out of University of California at Davis.
Yeah.
you know, we have history to our racing here, and you go back to, you know, the great Secretariat before him, you know, the Triple Crown winners. But to win a classic in Europe, where, you know, the birthplace of racing, just the whole scene scenario over there, it adds a certain something that I wouldn't say we lack, but it magnifies it even more being over there. As Garrett said, Longchamp, where we won the pool, is a beautiful course, and they've renovated the facility to where it's state of the art. But when you go up and you look over hundreds of acres of the Bois de Boulogne out in front of you, and the Eiffel Tower in the background, and you know, a race course that's in itself has to be 150 acres of greenery, it's just spectacular.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do you do this? How do you buy into a horse or buy horses from international sources and have that kind of success? I mean, is it just a lot of luck, or do you have to have a game plan? I mean, you know, over here in the US, we've got a lot of good sales here, but how do you go overseas and find horses that can compete at a good level?
Yeah, it's look, it's hard work and it is luck combined. I've been doing this probably longer than anybody here. I think I bought my first horse for Wally DeLossie at the ARC sale in 1994, a horse named Gothland, who came over and won 2 Group 2s for him. I cut my teeth on the racetrack in California when Charlie Whittingham, Les Barrera, that whole crew had probably the best turf horses in the United States. And that's where I caught the bug for turf horses from Europe. I studied it and, you know, learned from a lot of those people what it takes to find a horse that can run in the United States. And that was the first thing I did. So in the last few years, we've started leaving a few horses over there. I buy almost all of the horses in Europe. I buy privately, some at a couple of the thoroughbred auctions over there, but I am trying to buy maiden race horses or horses that show some kind of talent in their first out. With Metropolitan, he won his first race quite impressively. You could tell he was green. And like Philip does, I'm sure we watch a lot of races and get the results every day to see what's running over there. What happened with this horse in particular is I made an offer on him, and I was first in and they were considering it. And then someone else made an offer, and there were 2 or 3 more offers. The price escalated. The worst thing and the best thing that happened is a couple of the large Mid-Eastern entities made very strong offers, but the other owner, Rand and Monique, did not want to sell the whole horse. And I was able to negotiate a deal because they were able to stay in on the horse. They took some money off the table and we got lucky.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me just open this question up to all the panel. I was going to ask this a little bit later, but since you were talking about it. So here in the US, when a well-bred horse breaks its maiden impressively, and offers tend to come pouring in from trainers and owners, you know, either wanting to buy the horse or buy a substantial part of the horse. Is this a similar practice overseas, do you guys find?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, is that how American owners can get their foot in the door on a horse overseas?
You know, what I look for is you've got the Juddmonts and the Aidan O'Briens and the Moktums. I'm looking for the horse who's run very close behind them, first or second out. I look for a certain style of horse. I want a horse with a turn of foot, because if the horse doesn't work over there, my next program is to bring it to the United States. And with the type of racetracks we have here, if you don't have that burst of speed, that turn of foot, you can't compete over here. In Europe, because of the long straightaways, the uphills, the different courses, sometimes there will be a very good horse that's a bit of a grinder, and they will be in the races because they are better athletes. But you watch that horse that, you know, makes that quick burst of speed behind them. Maybe it needs to shorten up a little bit. So you have to kind of, in order to make it work, you have to take a little less than obvious, but hope you're finding a horse that, you know, has the tools to be a good racehorse in the future.
Okay, Philip, I mean, Medallia Racing, do you guys find horses overseas to buy into or to purchase in a similar way?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that in Europe, because the purse money is the way it is, you have a lot more people that are willing to sell. You know, in America, there are very few willing sellers. So if a horse breaks its maiden at Saratoga and you're calling, you know, generally the answer is just no before you even make the next step. And then the secondary thing is the price is just astronomical. You know, in Europe, you have a lot of smaller operations. And again, because the way the purse system's set up, you know, a fair amount of a trainer's business is trading horses. You know, they have a horse that runs well. You know, the next step for them a lot of times is selling that horse on. And there's a bunch of markets, whether it's to come to the US, to go to Hong Kong, if it's a colt. So there's a bunch of things, but I think that's a huge factor. You know, a lot of times, not to say we don't look to buy, I think this is especially true with maidens. But if you have an impressive 2-year-old winner, really, we just get completely priced out in America, and it's only the major entities that can really do anything. In Europe, the price point's a lot different. I think the opportunity is a lot different, and potentially the upside can be there. You know, a lot of times you'd be cheaper off going to find a horse in America that, you know, is probably a grade 3 level performer, maybe hasn't won a grade 3, than a 2-year-old maiden that just wins impressively first. I have no idea what it's going to do going forward. You know, that horse will be 2x a grade 3 performer, the way it works, especially if it's a dirt horse.
Yeah, okay. So Garrett, Juddmonte, Coolmore, I mean, there's so many big name owners in Europe. I mean, every one of your horses or their horses aren't going to be group winners. Do owners contact large racing operations to maybe acquire a horse that they can race in Europe and or race in the US? I mean, is that a common practice of the larger racing stables?
Yes, actually, and I think you'd be surprised. I mean, not as regularly as they would contact um, people that would be traditional sellers, but at the top end, I mean, you know, say some filly like Idiomatic or Scylla, no, we haven't
Oh,
had
right.
any phone calls at that level. And if they were owned by someone else, yes, maybe we would do. But at a slightly lower level, yes, we get a lot of phone calls, and especially by the time horses have run through their 3-year-old years here in the States, and people know that, okay, maybe it's a grade 3 horse, a listed horse, and they know we're probably not going to continue with them. And we usually do move those horses along. Historically, we moved them along in sales at the end of the year. The digital platform has now opened up opportunity for us to sell them right when they're performing well and probably worth their most. It has, but to touch on what Philip is saying, then from impacting what horses we bring from the UK or Ireland to or France to race over here, people probably notice that we don't have as many horses in the distance turf races as we had, say, 10 years ago. And there is a reason for that, related to Philip's point, is I'll have my eye on a Juddmonte horse over there that it'll have, maybe a 105 rating or whatever, and think, right, we can bring him over here. He's not a Kentucky bred, but he can still knock out, say, 5, 6, 700,000 in prize money if he's productive over a couple of years. And then I get told that there's an offer from Australia or Hong Kong or Bahrain or whatever for over $1 million on the horse. And, the logical decision on a horse at that level is to sell them. And that means we have thinned out our older grass division here in the US, but for good economic reasons.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's all good to know. So back to Pete, auctions in Europe, and Philip, I'm sure you're aware of this, and Garrett, are they similar to those here in the US? And can any U.S. owner just go there or hire an agent to purchase horse overseas and bring it back here? I mean, what's that process like? Pete?
Um, Absolutely the same as it is over here, really, for, nuts and bolts. If you're buying yearlings, Tattersalls, the Arcana sale, Goffs, you can go to those. There's a couple of very good racehorse sales, the October horses and training sale at Tattersalls, and again, the Arcana Arc sale are both good spots to try and find racehorses.
Okay. And so the process of going to the sale and all the conditions are very similar.
Yeah. Yeah, Philip, you don't buy much out of auction either, do you? Because I don't. I mean,
Yeah, we bought 6 yearlings last year over there for a group of partners, but typically Pete and I would operate primarily in the private market. But yeah, it'd be no different than here. You establish credit, you sign an authorized agent form. I would say just the auction process is a lot slower there. It's stressful when you buy because you think you've got it bought about 7 times and somebody comes to the last minute, and it's even more stressful when you're selling there. We've sold there before, and it just feels like you're never going to get to how you value the horse. But that's just, they always say it's like selling art over there, and here it's like selling livestock. But if you're familiar with the auctions here and you go there, it's that can be quite a wake up call.
Yeah, we had a panel last year that Mike Ryan was on, and he talked about how they always identify him bidding on a horse, which he doesn't particularly care for. But that's, I guess, part of the practice in a lot of the European sales.
Yeah,
Tom,
definitely. Yeah, definitely at Tats, the main auctioneer. With COVID, it changed a little bit. They would let you bid from outside, but typically the main auctioneer has to accept your bid. Whereas at Keeneland, you're bidding to a bid to or Feza, you're bidding to a bid spotter.
Yeah, we had Tom Biederman on that same panel, and he said, if I ever announce Mike Ryan's name bidding on a horse, I probably need to get to my car quickly. Okay.
Yeah. The one great thing I'd say is that they tell you who buys the horse basically immediately. So that is one trade-off is you get a lot more transparency. Like the hammer drops, at Keeneland, they'll say it's the stand in the back. Well, you got to run around to the back to see who signs the ticket. In Europe, they just say, oh, it's MB Magner or it's Jedmon or whoever.
Okay. And I assume they have agents over there that can represent owners just like we have here.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's basically the same, but with an accent.
Okay. Very good. So Philip, you're wearing 2 hats over there at TaylorMade. You're the racing manager for Medallion Racing. You're involved in the TaylorMade sales consignment. So give us an idea of how many Medallion racehorses you have that are racing overseas. Do you have a handful, a few? Do you have a dozen or so?
Yeah, we probably have about 10. We bought 6 yearlings last year for a group of partners off the back of the success we've had with Porta Fortuna. But primarily, our goal in the past has been to just bring them all to America. I think a lot of our partners have started to travel to Europe post COVID, and it's made it more appealing for them to want to own some horses over there, kind of with the thought that, if they turn out to be, stake horses, great, we can keep them there. If they don't, and we feel like they suit America, we can bring them back to the States. I think the other thing for some of our guys, it was very appealing. They got to meet the trainers, the level of communication generally, this isn't a 100% rule, but generally the communication is better. In Europe, I think we actually think it's more videos, more pictures from those horses than I would from any of the horses we have in the States. And I just think,
why is that? Why is that? Is it the trainers there do more, or what's the reason?
I think one thing is the trainers primarily all have private yards. So if we're with Donica O'Brien, who trains Porta Fortuna, all his horses are in one location. I've talked to a bunch of American trainers till I'm blue in the face about getting more. I tell everybody, but if you win 25% of your races, you're a Hall of Fame trainer, jockey, racehorse stable, whatever you want to describe it as. So 75% you're losing. You have to make it enjoyable the rest of the time, because if all you're doing is counting on wins, you're going to be in big trouble. And so it's just constantly, how can we, make a connection with our partners to this specific horse, because chances are, it's not, we buy everything hoping they're going to be a grade one winner, but in the reality, at the end of the day, I'm hoping they break their maiden and progress forward. Or if we're buying a horse that's already made, we're hoping it hits these heights. But I tell all my partners, if I knew every single horse that was going to be successful, it wouldn't be Medallion Racing, it'd be Philip Sheldon Racing, and I'd own them all myself. And that's just the nature of the beast. So,
Right.
And I think we bought yearlings, and I think some of our guys wanted that kind of experience. I think there's some thought, I don't know if Pete agrees or not. I think when you're having these turf horses, I think there is an advantage to having a turf horse go through the early stages of breaking, training in Europe. I think it's easier for them to make the transition to the US at a later point than, Chad's done it to extreme success with Seth Claremont, with all the horses they buy at Tats and bring over. They've had great success, but to me, they feel kind of like the outlier, and their budgets is a lot bigger than mine, so they can do it at a level that I just can't do it at.
So from the auction point of view, are there many U.S. owners that go to Europe to buy horses? You mentioned Klarovich, you mentioned Chad Brown. I mean, do we have many of our owners that do that and bring them back here?
There's a handful, but it's the number of Europeans that come to the number of Europeans that come to Keeneland dwarf the number of Americans that goes to Tattersalls. It's a bit of an untapped market for the U.S. And as Philip said, Chad has worked it pretty hard. Mike Ryan for both Chad and several other clients. Liz Crow has worked it hard. We're looking to go over to Tattersalls possibly this year to buy 2 or 3 horses. One of the things, though, is the emphasis on dirt is so strong over here that a lot of people don't want to go over for a turf horse. And that's why buying made turf horses has been something that's been easier for me to do when you're doing 1, 2, 5 a year, much easier to try and pick up made horses. And again, if you're Chad Brown, you're buying 20 yearlings, that makes a difference in why you're going to the yearling sales there.
Okay. So back to Philip, what are some of the, you got our clients that go over there. What are some of the benefits of racing overseas? Is it the purses? Is it the prestige? Is it the social aspect? And Pete and Garrett, feel free to chime in on this too.
I think at the lower end or the beginning of a horse career, it's definitely not the purses.
Okay.
The purse money in Europe is pretty abysmal at the maiden. And then, I tell a lot of the times if we have a horse over there, I'm like, don't run it back in this winner's race, because if I've already won a race, the system it's not an allowance system, it's a handicap system. But if I run back in a winner's race and I win, I might win $10,000, $15,000, and I've burned my allowance condition, which in New York is $100,000 race. So I could win 50 in New York versus 10 in Europe. So it's something you have to be very cognizant of. Now, at the top level, the purses are very good. I think it's especially for 2-year-olds. There are very few stake races in America for 2-year-olds. And if you have one that wins early, it's you're basically sitting on your hands for 4 months. So in my mind, it's definitely not the purses. I think the prestige is just unmatched in Europe. Pete talked about winning the French 2000 Guineas, and the feel of Longchamp and the tracks themselves are just unbelievable. But it's just a level which is very hard to imagine in America. Just again, the history. Go to Newmarket, and it's more or less been around since the 1600s. And it's just a different beast. I would also echo what they've said on the on-track experience is very good. The Curragh is completely new. Ascot was 2005, I think. When you go to Churchill now and you see the paddock and the investments that Churchill's made in the paddock, so there are other parts of Churchill that are still old and beaten down. And the way American racing works, it's very hard to stop to do any massive renovation project.
Right.
But you go see the paddock at Churchill Downs, and you go to any other racetrack, and it feels like it's like light years apart. I always equate it, when I was a kid, I'll go to the Cincinnati Reds Stadium, and it was, Riverfront Stadium. It's AstroTurf. It's basically the same exact layout as like 12 other stadiums. And then you go to, the new Great American Ballpark, you go to the new Cowboys Stadium relative to older ones, and it just doesn't even feel like the same thing. And Europe has really grasped that. I think that the race day experience is very good.
Okay.
We're lucky here. Keeneland is very good as well, and it's very historic, and it has some nicer spots that can put people. But the prestige and the race day experience in Europe are absolutely top notch.
Okay.
And
Go ahead. Yeah.
You almost have to educate owners over here to the experience they get over here, because a big day of racing over here, the racetracks try to help the owners, but the owners are still not much different than your average people who come into the racetrack. In Europe, I've got to say the owners are almost revered. Running in the St. James Palace, and Philip, you ran obviously and won at Royal Ascot also, but the hospitality, that you receive there compliments of the racetrack vis-a-vis the hospitality you receive here and have to pay for. Let's put it this way. Running at Royal Ascot vis-a-vis the Derby is a $40,000 swing to take 10 people, because you are the guests of the race course if you have the racehorse. You are not so over here in the United States.
Okay. So Garrett, Juddmonte, you race all over the world. What are your experiences from those racetracks as it relates to being owner representative, and how that comes across, and how they handle that?
Well, a certain amount of what Philip and Peter's saying, I do agree with. But one thing I probably have done an awful lot more than they have done over there is go to the second tier, third tier tracks. Let me tell you, the facilities, haven't been back there even last year. The facilities at those tracks have not changed since I was a kid. That's a long time ago. I've got a lot of gray hair. Mainly because they can't afford to. You still go into the races over there because it's a balance of what's good and what's bad. It's great to go out to to Churchill Downs and Keeneland and New York races, and it doesn't cost much to go into the races if it costs anything at all. If you want to go to some of those second tier tracks, it might cost you 50, 70, 80 pounds just to go in for a regular day's racing with no stakes. And you won't find any good catering or anywhere to get a drink at a nice facility in those places. And there's a reason they can't afford it. They're not making enough money on the day at all of those second, third tier tracks in Ireland, England. France is a little bit better because they've got a pari-mutuel system, and a lot of the money that goes through that actually goes back to the racetracks. Pete, you've been there more recently than I have to some of those tracks, but when I did go, it always surprised me what good facilities the second and third tier tracks in France had for that reason. But the bookmakers have a monopoly in Ireland and England, and it's very hard for enough money to go back to those tracks to make it worth their while to put really good renovations into them. So really, I think what we're talking about over there was the great facilities. It's really just the top, 8 or 10 tracks over there. The rest of the facilities would not match, or definitely wouldn't even be as good as the facilities that we have over here.
Okay.
We missed out on the county fair then, Garrett, out in California.
I'm sorry?
I said you missed out on the Santa Rosa County Fair in California.
Yeah.
That's third tier.
And you have sunshine out there.
So Philip, you were nice enough to share a win picture that we're going to show here on the screen from one of your great wins, the Coronation Stakes 2024 at Royal Ascot. It looks like you there on the far left, and is that Dean Reeves and Brad McNulty, and is that the King of England
Yeah, that was that was just a unbelievable experience. It still sometimes doesn't feel real. It felt very real. We went to collect the big trophy, and it's a perpetual trophy. And they said, "Oh, are you guys going to take that back to America?" And I said, "Well, yeah, we're all Americans." They said, "Well, you've got to bring it back." And then they hemmed and hawed, and they said, "You got to get an insurance policy." They said, "Why don't you just leave that here?" And we had to leave the big trophy here. It's the agent that I primarily work with in England, Mark McStay. It's on his it's in his living room, and he's now responsible for making sure that it gets returned to Ascot in one piece next year. But it's just an unbelievable thing. I think just like Pete said, you buy these horses hoping that they hit a certain level. And she's obviously done it. So fingers crossed she'll run here a week from Saturday. And hopefully she'll run big and then on to the Breeders' Cup in Del Mar.
Well, but now Philip and Pete, I mean, come on, Pete, you won those great races with Metropolitan over there. I mean, what's a chance of a regular guy, regular owner, regular lady just being able to have that experience? I mean, it's got to be rare.
I think that if you get into a partnership like mine or like the one Philip is a part of, it's still lightning striking, but it is quite possible to do. Just to venture out on your own and try to find a horse, it's like if somebody let me drive a Formula One car, what's my chances of winning? Almost zero. So you have to deal with the right people, put yourself in a position to get lucky, and it's not impossible. Philip will do it again. 2 years ago, I had La Parisienne, who was ahead in the Diane at Chantilly. So you can do it. It's hard work, and it might be 5 years before I win any kind of stake in Europe again. There's no guarantees in this game, but it's with the right people, anybody has a chance.
Yeah, right. I mean, I would agree. That's what makes this the best game there is. We ran in the race at Ascot, and Coolmore had their filly that ran second. The filly that won the English 1000 Guineas, who's owned by a Middle Eastern sheikh, was fourth. The Aga Khan had the French 1000 Guineas winner in behind. So you have the top, but we were able to get people, and people would say the same thing, go run in France, and it's the same. You have these massive entities, but if everybody knew which ones were guaranteed to win, there would be no sport. It would just be whoever had the most money. Okay. And that's what makes it great. I would just echo what Pete said. We have one of the guys that was next to the king on the other side of Dean, Steve Weston, is just a longtime partner. He owns a bunch of horses on his own. He owns some horses with us. He's been in the game 7 or 8 years. He's got a bunch of graded stakes wins, but it was his first Grade 1 win. And the way he's able to do it is because he takes 25%, 20% of a bunch of different deals and gives himself 10 chances instead of 2. Okay. And that's really what I think is good advice for everybody is, his experience is the same in that horse, whether he owned 100% or 25%, except his bills were a lot less. And he got to buy 2 more that could have been Porta Fortuna instead of buying one that wasn't and wishing he had bought into her.
Okay. So, we've talked a lot about, the prestige of racing horses over in Europe and overseas, but, here in the U.S., we have a lot of really good racetracks: Keeneland, Saratoga, Del Mar, Santa Anita, Belmont Park, Gulfstream Park, and many others. So, and each of these racetracks, they're in prime locations. They have beautiful settings, have some of the best racing, great stakes, purses. So I guess my question is, why then, with all the great racing, the beautiful locations, great purses, would an owner from the U.S. have horses racing in other countries? I mean, is it just about the prestige, or, are there other reasons why owners should be considering, racing overseas? We got a lot of good things here. Who wants to jump on that?
I think you're right. I think it is really just a prestige, and some people, like Maybe they have business over there, or they're like at a stage of their lives where they want to do something overseas and see a little bit of the world. But logically, from a prize money point of view, I think definitely in the last 10 years or so now, with the advent of the instant racing in Kentucky and Arkansas, and the prize money going up in New York, financially, in our operation, when we sit down at the end of the year, there's no comparison. It makes an awful lot more sense to race in the US. It's getting to be more expensive on a day rate in the US than it is over there. But if you have a quality horse over here knocking out purse money, it's possible for that horse obviously to pay its way and make a profit. It's very difficult for a horse to make a profit. And that's why, as you know, again, Philip was alluding to earlier, that's why trainers over here can make money. Jockeys over here make a lot of money out of their percentage winnings. Trainers over there are actually looking to sell horses out of their stables, because the way that they make money is from their 10% from a sale out of their horses. They're actually pushing to sell the horses.
Okay. Good point.
Horses that actually pinpoint what Garrett just said. Got a filly named Excellent Question. 14 starts over here, 2 wins, been on the board another half a dozen times. She's knocked out 220,000. That same filly with that race record in Ireland or England probably would have knocked out $18,000.
Wow.
So that's what the difference is in purse money. Now, having said that, my colt Metropolitan, having won a classic on the turf in France, has a extremely high value as a stallion prospect. If he had won 3 grade 1s on the turf over here, he'd be worth 20 cents, maybe 10 cents on the dollar of what we got for him in Europe. Because turf horses in America, especially the colts, there's not much respect for their stallion value.
Okay.
There's different, there's ebbs and flows to both of them. You have to have a high quality horse in Europe to make it work. When I leave a horse in Europe, when I'm buying from a trainer over there and an owner, especially if I'm partners with them, one of the parts of the contract is by June of their 3-year-old year, I have the option to bring them to the United States. Just because that horse who can win a listed or a grade 3 over here can probably knock out that $500,000 that Garrett talked about, whereas he's got no shot of getting 20% of that in Europe.
Okay. So with all that, go ahead, Philip. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I'd agree. I think the one place it changes is the 2-year-olds. There are, I think there are like 20 stakes races before the first stake in America for 2-year-olds. So, you have a lot more options with 2-year-olds to try to get black type than you would, basically Kentucky, the PG Johnson and Kentucky Downs, and I think it's the Catch a Glimpse in Canada. Those are kind of the first round of races. But realistically, in America, pre-Breeders' Cup, you can run in 2. If you ran at Kentucky Downs, you could probably come back in the Jessamine at Keeneland for a 2-year-old filly. So you just don't have very many options for 2-year-olds. With 3-year-olds, it definitely opens up, the amount of opportunity that you have. And I would say, we're like Pete. I mean, the majority of horses we buy are to come to America. Now, we may buy them from Europe and we may leave a couple there, but they really have to be, even if they're a grade 3 horse in Europe, they could be a grade 1 horse here. We only buy fillies. So the thing we have to weigh is like, there are just 4 grade 1s for fillies, 2 at a mile and a quarter, 2 at a mile and an eighth. And so you have to make sure that they want to go that far. And if they're a miler, then you got to wait. Does it make sense to come over? But there's still a ton of those races, that you could just run out purse money. So it just makes it, even if there are at a high level in Europe, you still have to always consider bringing them here, because there could be substantial upside from a purse perspective.
Okay. Well, with all that being said, with everything the U.S. has to offer as it relates to purses and beautiful racetracks, Why aren't there more owners from other countries sending their horses here to race in the U.S.? Seems like a no-brainer.
I think you're going to see, probably going to see that increase in years. But you bring up a very interesting point that I've pointed out, you know, at meetings for owners meetings, TOBA meetings and whatnot. But if you go to the sales over in Ireland, even if the sales here, I mean, they have the Irish Thoroughbred marketing crew will be here at all of the sales at the Breeders' Cup. You'll have the Japanese will be represented at all of those events, representing breeders and owners, and selling their product. And we don't do it well. I think, you know, we probably should have an entity that is funding that side of things and actually be represented at all of the big events in Europe, at the racing and at the sales, and telling people you should come over here. That's if we want it. I mean, do we want Europeans to come over here and necessarily beat us at our own game? I don't know. Maybe there isn't enough appetite for that, but would it make an awful lot of sense for Europeans and Australians and wanted to race stables over here? Maybe not Australians because they've got a very good price or purse structure themselves, but definitely Europeans. Yes, I think quite a few of them.
Yeah, I think
are leaning that way.
The only U.S. entity that does it is the Breeders' Cup. You know, they're at all these events, and I would say they're very successful at getting, you know, horses from Europe to come over. I think the participation from Europeans at the Breeders' Cup is probably, you know, as high as it's ever been, just in the pure number of starters. And they're really the only entity that does it. But Garrett's right. You know, if we have a horse running at a premium track in England, you know, I have a contact at GBRI, which is the Great British Racing International, and it's a funded entity that their whole goal is to increase international ownership in Great Britain. And they always look after us and take unbelievable care of us and make sure that everybody's got a car to the races. Everybody's, you know, got the right hotel. Everybody's got the right seats. And, you know, it definitely pales in comparison. Like we took a group trip to Ireland. We didn't have a horse running. And Charles O'Neill at Irish Thoroughbred Marketing basically helped us plan an entire week-long trip for all of our partners, made sure we, you know, had everything at the Curragh for Irish Derby Week, make sure we were in the right hotels. We had this just a dream week trip, and we didn't even have a horse running. And at that point, we only owned one horse in Ireland, and they just went out of their way to make it this unbelievable thing. Now it paid off because it's dramatically increased our level of ownership.
Okay, so it sounds like, because my next question was going to be, what can we do to attract more overseas owners? It almost sounds like we need to have an entity, a planned resource that would go to those big races and those race tracks and represent U.S. ownership. Is that what you were saying, Garrett?
Yes, and it has been discussed and debated pretty much at length at a lot of meetings, and a lot of people agree with it. Now it's at a stage, I think, where does the money come from? Decision is always one of the things that puts the handbrake on. And personally, it wouldn't bother me in the least if there was a small percentage taken off every horse purchased at the sales, whether I'm buying or selling. I think if it's a small amount and that all goes to a fund that, you know, promotes racing overseas, and maybe that fund would also, you know, I mean, we're doing it with aftercare. We should be doing it with promotion as well, and we should be doing it using that money as well, maybe to defend our sport when things go wrong. I mean, that's
Okay.
probably.
Pete, any thoughts on what we can do to attract more owners to race here in the U.S. from overseas?
I mean, they're both right. Each country has a concierge service in Europe that is funded by the government, you know, and or the racetracks. I'm not exactly sure in England how it works, but France Gallup, whenever I want anything, I just check in there with their horseman's liaison and it happens. Here, we still have each racetrack is a fiefdom, and Philip said how the Breeders' Cup does a good job of getting horses over here. Well, Naira did that a few years ago with, I just had a brain freeze on their racing secretary. Garrett, help me out there.
He's Martin Panza, was it?
Yeah, Martin Panza.
Panza started that whole program to bring those European horses in. Funny enough, he's at Kentucky Downs. How many European horses did you see there this week? He's good at it. And so each racetrack, because of how we're set up, needs to make that investment. And not everyone is really got enough foresight to do it, I guess, or it's just they don't feel they need it. So unless we had I don't want to keep everybody harps about how horse racing needs a centralized governing body, but perhaps just a centralized marketing system for doing this along the lines of what Garrett says. I hate them always taking owners' money, but it seems like that's the only place to get money in this business is from the people who win the races. It should be done.
Okay.
Yeah, I think too, you're really thinking about it from two different angles. Do you want people to like buy horses in America that are just based here to run here? Or do you want to come from Europe or come from another jurisdiction to race here? Because I think just like Pete said, there are probably more European horses running at Kentucky Downs this year than they probably ever have. There would be, the last kind of take out COVID, but around COVID, that 5 or 6 year window of the Breeders' Cup, it's probably record level of participation. I think the other thing that's changed, like in America, we have to deal with it. I'm sure Pete and Garrett both do. Like, there's no Tech Sutton anymore. So just getting from place to place, if it's not close, is just a nightmare. And from Europe, it's a little bit tougher. Like Brexit, it's changed some of the rules on where you can fly out of, what your flight options are. Sometimes to come run for a big race, you have to go from Ireland to the Netherlands, which is a ferry. You have to get on a ship, ferry to the Netherlands, quarantine in the Netherlands for a couple of days, come to America, then quarantine at the airport for a couple of days, and then go to the track, and you're out of your stall for a week. Well, who thinks that is a good way for a horse to perform at the top level? Godolphin's been very fortunate. They don't have it this year. They have they have a little bit more friendly negotiating power, but they just have their own plane typically. So it's one of the reasons why, and it's one of the big reasons why Charlie Appleby just had a string in New York, as opposed to just taking the horses back and forth. And that's not cheap. That can cost you, somewhere between 30 and 40 grand to come over and go back. So then you start saying, well, the purse money, I always tell everybody this, the purse money in America is really good if you win, or if you have a horse like Pete does that just consistently is running first or second. But if it's $100,000 race and you run third, you're clearing like $7,500 or $8,000. By the time you take trainer, vet, whatever, you've made $2,000 that month. It's great to run in this $100,000 race, but the real value comes in winning the race. Running fourth, you don't even cover your monthly expense. And so it's like, do you want to pay 30 like we're dealing with? We try to bring a filly over, and I don't think she's going to get into the race at Kentucky Downs. Now, we just made a decision that we're going to keep her in America after Kentucky Downs, no matter what happened. But that's a significant expense that we have to incur to do that. And so it's just the economics have to make sense. And a lot of trainers, if they have a really good horse, they're going to want to run it here and then take it back. They're not going to want to lose it. I think it's one of the great positions Garrett and his team at Jedmon are in, is that they're such a large operation, and they have used these trainers for a long time, and it's it's the same everywhere. Dealing with people that you can trust and you trust are going to give you an honest opinion and help you be successful, you just have to have that in this business, because it's so many moving parts.
Sure, great point. Yep. So we're just about to the end of our questions for the panel. I do have one more question. I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question for our panelists, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your question. And we do have several questions in the queue, and we'll get to those here in just a minute. So last question, guys. So what advice would you give to an owner here in the U.S. that would like to either acquire horses from international markets and or bring them back here to race in the U.S. or to buy into a horse overseas to have that racing experience? So let's just start with Garrett. What's your best advice to give to an owner that's listening to this and says, hey, this sounds like it might be something I want to do?
You know, it's a big learning experience. I think if you're going to do that, and you probably don't know what your comfort level is until you experience it. So I would absolutely advise to go into a Medallion Racing or West Point or one of those groups first of all, and get your and get called, please. But you know, get into a partnership and get your education through that, and you know, have people like Pete and Philip that you can call and say, hey, I don't understand this. Why do we do it this way? Why don't they do it some other way? Because while you're learning all of that, you'll find out what you like and what you don't like, and whether it's for you or whether it's not for you. And if it is for you, you'll have yourself educated by the time you're willing to take a bigger plunge in, and you might do things a little bit differently at that point in time than originally you might have done.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Like to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is that if you're going to get into European racing, do it through a partnership. But first is do your due diligence. You know, find out what the costs are. Find out if there is an exit strategy. Find out if these are horses that potentially can come to the United States, depending on their racing careers in Europe. And you know, questions are the best way to figure out what you want to do, given the amount of money and time you have to spend in doing something like this. You know, it's like, do you want to go to a MLB soccer game here, or do you want to go see the Arsenal play in Europe? You know, it's like, where is your comfort level in the sport that you hopefully love? Because you got to love this sport if you're going to be in it.
Okay. Philip, advice?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, it's just the same as, like, imagine if you already own horses in America and you're thinking about this, you know, how did you get into it in America? You know, and I just think the best way, like Garrett said, is you have to educate yourself. You have to ask questions, try to find someone who is a good resource, or, you know, you could partner with, because the last thing anybody wants, and I feel fairly confident speaking for Pete and Garrett, as people that love this sport, the last thing anybody wants is, I've had somebody that's been with me for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, they have no clue what has happened. And unfortunately, I think that happens a lot. I talk to people that are thinking about Medallion or thinking about doing other things, or I'm saying, hey, Medallion's not the right fit. You could do X, Y, Z. And they're like, well, I've been in it for a while, and I just really have no clue what's happened. I don't know really what my financial exposure is. I really haven't had much fun. And what they found out is what they really want is to do some small segment of the market. And they hate buying yearlings because they don't want to wait. But they look up and they've spent $2 million on yearlings, and you're just like, why are you doing that? And it's the same with anything. You have to find what you like and try to educate yourself as quickly as you possibly can, and do what people you trust.
Okay. All right. Well, great. So that wraps up our discussion. So we're going to go to the Q&A from the audience. But first, let's hear from our Q&A sponsor, West Point Thoroughbreds, while I sort through some of these questions. And then we'll be right back with those questions. So let's go ahead and run that real quick, and I'll be right back.
How do you become the gold standard in racing partnerships? One horse, one partner, one victory at a time. Congratulations to all our partners who have made West Point the gold standard for the last 3 decades.
Okay. All right. First question from the audience. How do I find a trainer or a best match in Europe for my US born horse, and how to connect with them in Europe? So how would an owner go about even finding a trainer to train their horse in Europe? Pete?
You know, again, if you don't want to go through a partnership and you're just going over there, these owner liaisons that they have, Charlie in Ireland, Transgallop has an owner liaison. I'm not aware of who it is in England, but you can find those people. They'll give you a list of trainers, and you can probably get a pretty, you can do an email interview, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Camilla Parrott is who I deal with in Great Britain.
Okay. You heard any thoughts on lining up a trainer over there for an owner?
Again, I mean, if you have connections here that do have a lot of dealings, and again, Pete and Philip have plenty of that experience, and there are other agents over here that have similar experiences over there, and they're going to give you names, probably personal preferences, but a lot of inside information as well.
Okay, next question. What are the best resources in order to follow racing internationally, and what service are best to gauge ability? For instance, in this country, there are many speed figure services that are used. So what are some of those best resources internationally for an owner if they're tracking horses over there?
Well, the Racing Post obviously is the GOAT, is their daily racing form, and I think an even better product. You get all your form, you get all of the information on there, you get the replays, obviously depending on what level of subscription you have, and you get it immediately after every race as well. I've gotten to a stage where I don't watch many of the races live, given the times of day that they're running it, and I'll come in late morning and see when all of our runners what they've done, and it's like watching it live. But you get the Racing Post ratings. And when growing up, I was a time form person, whereas over here that's equivalent of the Beyer speed figures or the Ragusons or Thorograph. But I think the Racing Post ratings, which are available in every single one of the runners in their form, are available to you, and I think I'll guarantee that Pete and Philip use the Racing Post ratings in assessing the level of ability of horses that they might be interested in making bids on.
Okay, good, great point.
Yeah, and I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying Pete does more in France than I do, but like France Gallo has a free website. You can get all the replays. Racing Post you have to pay, but it's pretty like relative to what an unlimited DRF subscription would get. Racing Post is probably a quarter of the cost.
Okay. Next question. What are your thoughts on synthetic surfaces, and how will the reintroduction of synthetic surfaces affect racing breeding and buying in the US? And I believe they have synthetic surfaces over in Europe, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's it been? The last 15, 20 years they've put them in over there? And
a lot more than that. I would say probably 25, 30 years. Yeah.
Time flies when we're having fun, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's an integral part of their winter racing in Europe, and also in France, meets like Deauville, where again, in Europe, usually they race 3 days at one track, 3 days at another, and it gets spotted around so they don't tear up courses. Deauville in August gets used more heavily than any one track in Europe. Since they've put in the synthetic there, they use that for a lot of their lesser races, and it's been a really good adjunct for French racing.
Okay.
And good horses, run on it. As a lot of trainers use it in prepping horses in England and Ireland also.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know to the scale at which it is going to happen in America. It happened at one point in time, with Keeneland and California had all their tracks. I think the consolidation, of basically Topeka kind of being the winner of the synthetic surfaces, maybe that helps. But it's probably too early to know. I know I made plenty of money when Genmont would send some of their Euro horses out to California. I think Ventura, she probably paid for a semester of college.
I think the oddity of synthetics is that both in Europe and over here, everyone acknowledges that they're a tremendous help at certain times of year, winter time. We have a training track here on the farm, and in the springtime, it's magnificent. When dirt tracks are flooded and sloppy, and it can be pouring down rain, and we don't have to stop training. It's water's shooting out the drains. Safety obviously is better, even though the dirt tracks have improved very considerably in recent years. But in Europe and over here, for some reason, people just don't seem to grasp that racing is as exciting on synthetic as it is on either dirt or firm turf. Horses don't look spectacular like they do. I don't think Flightline would have been Flightline on a synthetic surface. And as a lot of people say, the difference between first and last in a top class synthetic race is about 10 lengths, and in a dirt race is about 30 lengths. And I think, exceptional horses look exceptional on firm turf and on dirt tracks. And people don't seem to want to really talk that through, I think, but it's probably a fact. And it's an explanation why people still want to keep dirt racing as long as they can keep it safe. And I think equally, turf racing is exceptional on a safe turf track as well.
Okay. Next question. Where can I find a condition book for upcoming international meets and races? Is there a central database similar to the one that exists in North America with Equibase?
Garrett, you can take that one.
Yeah, well, no, that's again, most of that is available on the Racing Post, and there are websites over there, BHA websites, in Ireland, Turf Club websites, and I'm sure France Gallo probably has it on there as well in France. But yeah, all freely available. And further, whereas condition books, I find our European trainers and even our owners get a bit frustrated and say, where's this horse going to run next? And we can't say because the new condition book isn't out yet, because they wait until 3 weeks before the actual event before they, for good reason, they want to see what horses are available to run. But the races are planned much further in advance in Europe than they are over here, to their detriment sometimes. So that's why you'll see 3-horse races when they plan too far in advance.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can get your stakes book that has all the group or listed races, before the season even starts for the entire year.
And that's almost true races too. They'll have, maiden races at Deauville that are there every year on the card on the same day or a day apart. And the trainers point their horses for those particular maiden races 6 months in advance.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing is it's not a set, like some of the years, just when the track actually gets the meeting. Like at Nace in the springtime, it might be, April 28th, or one year it might be May 9th, but it's the same races that are more or less run that same day every year. The date might differ. Like I remember Porta Fortuna, she had a series where she ran in the same exact schedule that Meditate ran in, who had won the Breeders' Cup the year before. And the dates were like a week off on a couple of them, but it was the same race, the same track, the previous year's version.
Okay, a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap things up. So another one from the audience. How important is it for a horse to be EBF, which is European Breeders' Fund, nominated if you want to take your horse to race in Europe? How important is that?
Obviously very important because an awful lot of the races are restricted EBF races, or else, you know, the prize money that you're running for without EBF nomination is going to be negligible. But you know, when this was all happening at first, we had horses that we decided not to nominate 1 year, and then Prince Gala changed his mind and said, no, send them on over. And we just rolled the dice and thought, well, let's see if they're going to need to be EBF nominated, they're going to run early enough to need to be nominated. And they were, of course. And then all of a sudden they're ready to run, and you can't find suitable races for them. So yeah, it is necessary.
Okay. So last question. What are some of the import and quarantine restrictions to consider when bringing a foreign horse into the U.S.? How difficult is that, or how simple is that process?
Much easier now because we do a lot of it, obviously. 2 different ways to bring a horse into the US, and I think that it's only takes 2 to 3 weeks now from Europe in. It's a little bit different from England because European Union countries have different restrictions, more so going from the US back to England, which takes a whole month of quarantine. If you're going from here back to European Union countries, you just take all of the blood work here, and you can get on a plane and go straight on over there without doing a quarantine. Coming back over here, if you're coming over here and you want to race and then get back on the plane and go straight back without doing any quarantine or new blood work, you come over, you stay in a quarantine facility, which is what they do at Breeders' Cup. There's a designated quarantine facility at the Breeders' Cup. They can exercise on the track, but not with all of the other horses, and then just go straight back to the quarantine facility. Races are over, straight back to the airport, and you can go straight home. If you come in on an export license or whatever they call it, you come in, you can go straight once you're cleared and do that 2 days at a quarantine facility, maybe at Churchill Downs or at Chicago, or JFK has one as well. You take all your bloods, and after 2 days you're cleared, and then you're considered similar to any American racehorse. But if you want to go back to Europe after that, then you'll have to do a month's quarantine to get back.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, I would just say your shipping agent, whoever you use to ship your horses, should be taking care of 100% of that. So, like we use Mersant. I don't know who Pete or Garrett use, but I use Mersant, and they should handle 100% of that. You shouldn't be having to track that down.
Okay, they're super efficient.
Yeah,
they take care of everything.
I think they're a sponsor. I saw their logo on here.
They're one of our sponsors. Absolutely, yeah. So gentlemen, that wraps up our Q&A session, and I'd just like to tell the audience, and you may think of a question later on. If you have any follow-up questions, we've got email addresses for the gentleman on the call today, and if you don't want to jot those down now, when we have the recorded version of this up, you can always come back and get their contact information. And if you forget to do that, you can just email me, and I'll pass on your question to one of the speakers. So hey, a huge thanks to Garrett, Philip, Pete. Very sorry Rick couldn't join us, but really your insights, you're helping us understand better what this whole international arena is like for buying racing. So a big thanks to all 3 of you. Really appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Great. I'd like to also thank our audience for being here, and to all owners for investing in our sport, because without owners, we simply don't have an industry or a sport. So thank you very much, audience. And we're going to be back in October with another online webinar. So until then, we wish you well, enjoy the upcoming yearling sales, and we hope you visit the Winter Circle, and we hope you visit it often. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.